So if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I picked up the Sony RX1R Mark III. And I really dig this little camera. I think it might be Sony's best camera, and I'll probably make a whole video about that. But because I was enjoying this little pocket rocket so much, it got me curious about Sony's more recent offerings that I haven't tried. Specifically, the Sony A1 Mark II. Kind of the thinking goes that since I was enjoying this so much, it would be great if my bigger, kind of like more pro, work cameras could also be Sony and that I'd have like my fun little everyday carry camera. Of course, not replacing my Leica M cameras. The Safari ain't going anywhere. No one can out Leica except maybe Leica. But, the M experience is unparalleled in digital photography. That's not what we're talking about here. Just want to be clear. But for like autofocus, digital cameras, this is so much fun that I thought it would be great if I could use Sony cameras also for my work cameras and not have to leave the system, not have to like think about other menu systems, all those things. Of course, this is not interchangeable lens. This has a different battery than this camera, so it's not a perfect fit, but, just wanted to try it. And this is kind of a gear channel, so who are we kidding? I like to try different cameras. So the purpose of this video is really just to kind of give my first impressions of the A1 II, trying it out, seeing how I liked it. It's not really comparison of this versus the RX1R Mark III. In terms of fun and all that stuff, it's just a different ball game. We're talking about interchangeable lens, multi-function camera versus fun point and shoot camera. They're just two different categories. So I'm not really going to compare these. I'm really just going to talk about first impressions here. If anything, I think the camera that I would compare this guy most to is my Panasonic S1R Mark II, because these would kind of fill the same function, pour the liquid into the same bucket for me in terms of hybrid photo video. So I'll probably mention this camera a few times when I'm talking about this, because that's really what I'm comparing in my mind. You could also substitute the Panasonic for the Canon R5 Mark II or probably the Nikon Z8. I know there's some differences, stack sensors, those kinds of things. But for the vast majority of things that I do, those differences are pretty negligible. So first, build quality. I think Sony has done a pretty great job updating its body style and overall build quality. The previous body style, like the A7R5 body style, was a big reason I didn't go with Sony. That body style, that grip, etc., just gave me the ick. So I'm happy to report here that like this body style has removed, I'm going to say like 80% of the ick factor. The build quality feels very solid, way more premium than the last generation. The grip is quite a bit better. It's still a little small for my tastes. I would say the Panasonic S1R's grip is just a little beefier, a little more comfortable for me. So I think Sony could go even further, making the grip a little bit bigger. But overall, this is a big improvement. Sort of the rounding here is really nice. There's still not a lot of room between your fingers and a bigger lens. But overall, nice job. The dials feel properly clicky. They have a good tension. The buttons are fine. They're different sizes and different sort of heights, which is really good. So it makes it easy to find the buttons when you have the camera up to your eye using the EVF and you're looking for a particular button. Like for example, if you look here, the C1 and C2 buttons are actually different heights. I also like the button up here. You can use for pre-capture or super fast frame rates, really smart. Also, in terms of buttons and dials, I do think Sony has one of the better layouts here. I mean, you've got the whole exposure triangle here too, right? You've got two dials up here that you can adjust with, shutter speed and ISO, say. And then you've got a third spinning wheel that's also a D-pad back here. I love that. And then you've got a bonus dial up here. So you can set this up in all different kinds of ways. Plus, you have an aperture ring on a lot of the modern Sony lenses. So, just really good, really customizable, really like it. There's also, at least on the A1 II, the switch between photo, video, S and Q, slow and quick, and then also a drive mode and focus mode dial all right on the camera. Really nice. I hope that Sony keeps this whole layout for other cameras like the A7R6 and I guess A7 IV, because this is really handy. It always seemed like a shame to me that in their other models, this whole area just would remain blank and empty. It seemed like a waste of space. So this 2-dial setup here is a much better solution. The joystick on the back is fine, nothing to write home about. I think it could stick out a little bit more, maybe even be a little bit smaller, but not a huge deal. I don't have any issue with, the flaps they used here. They feel nice and solid. They're not like full plastic. They're kind of rubber, but they're a nice solid rubber. So, no worries of them tearing off, or at least too easily. Of course, best in the business screen flips out, flips up and down, makes it easy to shoot like this. Just like the best in the business, the 5-way axis, whatever you're calling it, flip out, flip up, flip up, flip out, whatever you want to call it. Just great. The battery door is fine, nothing big there. I really like that Sony included a larger eye cup in the A1 II. We'll get more into my feelings about these screens, but this eye cup does make it much easier to see through the EVF, especially on a sunny day. So that's a really nice addition. I commend Sony for doing that. So, like I said, I would say we're like at a 20% ick factor, a much lower ick factor. The grip is a little too small for me still. I shot like an event, like a 2 or 3 hour event with this guy, and my hand did cramp up a little bit because the grip is so small. So it's not perfect, but it's such a vast improvement over the last generation, I can't really complain. Oh, I love that you can turn the shutter on to be a sensor protector when the camera's turned off. I wish all cameras had this. Very happy to see it in the Sony. I even like the way they have like just a little bit of orange on the lens mount now instead of a big old orange circle. I just think this looks pretty slick, way better than before. Like on most of the new Sony cameras, you've got 2 card slots that can use the CF Express Type A or regular SD card in them, which I think is a pretty clever solution, actually. I don't mind these CF Express Type A cards. These are tiny little guys. I would prefer 2 CF Express Type B cards in here, although I'm not sure there'd be space in a camera this size. And while I appreciate Sony's dedication to making the smallest camera possible, I kind of feel the same way I do about the RX1RIII. If they had made it just a little bit bigger, you could have had features like the CF Express card or like the bigger normal, FX battery in here. Sometimes being so dedicated to one goal actually causes too many sacrifices. That's kind of how I feel about the memory cards in this camera. Okay, let's talk about operation of the camera. Even though this is like a super fast shooting camera, like the frame rates you can do on this just rip. I'm not going to go into all the specs. This isn't a camera that got released late last year. You can go look at plenty of other videos to get those numbers, 40 frames per second, all that stuff. It shoots plenty fast for anything I'm doing. Casual sports, little kids, that kind of a thing, event shooting. It's plenty fast. What I'm talking about more is like the overall operation of the camera, okay? So I'll say it's actually kind of a little bit slow. Like when you turn on the camera, it takes a second to get going. You saw how long that was. So that's a little bit annoying. There's other cameras in this day and age. You turn the thing on, you just switch the on button, it's just ready to go. Not this. It's kind of like a computer. It needs like a minute, not a minute. It needs like a few seconds to start up, which I think is odd for such a fast shooting camera. I have to wonder if some of this operational funkiness comes from Sony's roots as a point and shoot, like portable camera maker, floppy disk camera maker, and a video camera maker. For example, in manual focus, the distance scale isn't very accurate or detailed, but then also you can only show the distance in meters. There's no way to show that distance in feet. Isn't that crazy? How small of a firmware update could that be? I'm not sure if it's just the way the shutter button is tensioned or if it has something to do with the fact it's like front curtain shutter only, that kind of thing. But it feels like either like the shutter isn't quite connected to the shutter button when you press it, or maybe there's like the tiniest bit of delay between when you press the button and the shutter fires. I'm not sure you'll be able to hear or see this, but I'm going to try here. Press. Whereas with the RX1RIII, it just feels connected more. It sounds connected more. Press. I don't know. You tell me. In comparison, you turn on the S1R Mark II. It turns on way faster. There's a little bit of a lag there. But then when you push the shutter button, it's almost instantaneous when it shoots. It's so weird that the Sony has that delay. And it's not that big of a deal. You get used to it, but it's annoying. Another thing I find weird about this camera is that when you flip the camera horizontal like this, the information display doesn't flip with it. That's so weird to me. Um, on the RX1R Mark III, it does flip. So I'm not sure what happened with the A1 Mark II, if that's coming in a firmware update or what. Having said that, like the Panasonic has the same problem. It also doesn't flip to horizontal for some reason. And I'm pretty sure the S9, which I sold, I don't have it anymore to test, but I'm pretty sure the information does flip horizontal on the S9. So I don't know if it's like a flagship thing that like it's not a pro feature that I didn't get that memo or what, but I find it annoying. I like it when the information flips when you're horizontal so you can shoot like this. Just kind of a strange thing. I'm sure they can fix it in the next firmware update, but it's something I noticed. I will also say that Sony's new menu system, which is really not that new now, I think we're on the second or third generation of cameras that have it, I actually find very logically laid out. I would say the menu system, once you get used to it and kind of figure out how they've done things, is way more coherent than the Panasonic Lumix menus, maybe more coherent and better organized than Nikon menus, but not at the level of like Leica or Hasselblad menus. But good enough and better than most in terms of menus. Let's talk about screen quality. I know that Sony has like a 9 point something .evf in here and the back screen's improved, but honestly, I would say the screens are still kind of weak on this camera. I don't know if it's like the way they tone the colors or something or what, and I'm not sure this will come through, on the video for YouTube here, but like the S1R2, which also does not have a great back screen, looks better, looks brighter. The colors are more vibrant. And then same thing with the EVF. This is a 5 point something .evf, which is fine. It's not like class leading by any means, but I feel like it's about the same or maybe even brighter than the Sony one. So I think Sony still has some work to do in terms of improving its viewfinder and back screen experience to compete with the likes of Canon and Nikon and Leica when I'm talking about like the SL3 series. This is one of those things where, spec sheets don't tell the whole story, right? This EVF should be best in class, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels kind of tiny and kind of dark. The eye cup here on the back of the Sony does help, but not so much to even make it feel better than the Panasonic here that has barely any eye cup. People say that Sony has the best lens selection, and it does have some bangers of lenses. Like these G Master lenses are fantastic. I think the best full frame lens ever made, the Voigtlander, whatever it is, like 105, 120, 20 millimeter macro, is only available for Sony E-mount. But and I'm not sure if it's like a modern era thing or what, but like Sony's never made tilt shift lenses for these cameras, The macro lens for it is super old. So, yes, do all these different third-party manufacturers make lenses for the Sony? And if like a Chinese lens manufacturer makes a lens, they always make it for the E-mount first. All true. But for the sort of like, edge case stuff that I'm more interested in, fisheyes, tilt shift, that kind of stuff, the Sony E-mount actually isn't that great. I would put it like up against the L mount, kind of, you get a lot of stuff in the L mount. Sigma makes glass for both of these. That's probably the third party lens manufacturer I'm most interested in, especially with the BF. I've got a whole bunch of videos about the Sigma BF coming out. So, for me, it's kind of a wash. It's not that big of an advantage. Again, don't want to diminish that the G Master glass is great. There's a ton of options for Sony, but it's just that big of a selling point for me personally, especially with the L mount really catching up and coming out with all kinds of fun stuff, including with third-party lens manufacturers. Okay, this is a big one. Image quality. Sony makes sensors for most cameras. Like I'm pretty sure there's a Sony sensor in this camera, in all the Panasonic cameras, all the Leica cameras, the cameras that I love. This Leica M11P Safari almost certainly has a Sony sensor in it, right? But I still think that Sony is hobbling its class-leading sensors, this super fast reading, top of the pops, it was like so far ahead of the competition a few years ago. It's still probably class-leading stack sensor, whatever it is, 50 megapixels. I still think they're hobbling it with their lousy color science. They just haven't improved it. I think the color science might be a tad bit better in the RX1R Mark III. There are some times when this makes some beautiful cinematic photos. But in here, it's like slightly worse, I think. Maybe I'm imagining it. I don't know. But it's just not that great. They haven't nailed skin tones. I love that you can do the creative picture profiles, turn them on and off. Then you also have regular picture profiles, which are effectively film LUTs, which you can customize. And the level of customization in those picture profiles, those film LUTs, is nuts. Like, I don't think Sony gets enough credit for that. I think a lot of creators don't understand how the color management tools in Sony's work. Like, there's two different sets of color management tools in the Sony cameras, right? And I don't think people give Sony its due for that. But having said all that, like, the amount of customization is great, but I don't want to get that into it. And the starting point is just not that great. The colors aren't right, especially in terms of skin tones. Skin tones are very orangey coming out of this camera. Like, my niece just had her like senior pictures taken, and the photographer used modern, like, I'm not sure if they were A1s or A7R5s, but used like very modern Sony cameras, and without being told, without seeing anything but the files that like were given to my sister, my niece's mother, just for review, I immediately could tell it was a Sony camera that had taken those pictures because of the skin tones, the orangey skin tones. That's not fixed here in this camera. Same kind of thing in video. Like, yes, you have S-Cinetone. The picture profile number one can yield really nice results sometimes, but again, it's just not quite right. And like in photo, can you use Tony Kuiper's linear profiles? And in video, can you use S-Log3, Cine 3, whatever it is, as a sort of like a flat starting point to get your colors to where you want? Yes, you can, of course. But is it like way more work? Why, yes, it is. The colors are so far off, and I don't have like the years of history with Sony to fix it and know how to fix it. So it just ends up that like it's harder for me to fix the colors the way I want. And that might be the deal killer for me. Like, the hardware has improved enough on these cameras that is usable to me. The screens aren't the best, but they're good enough. The lens selection is excellent. I can adapt, just like I would with the L mount cameras. I can adapt most of the lenses I want with this. These are more the hybrid video side of things. But because the colors are wonky, it just makes my life less easy. And there's other cameras like the S1 II where the colors aren't as wonky. The camera can do basically everything I need. Maybe it's slightly more functional than the Sony. And they're cheaper. This Panasonic cameras are cheaper. So like, just the color science being so off kind of kills it for me. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this is just a first impressions. I'm going to keep trying this camera, keep working with it, next to the S1R Mark II and some other cameras I have, the Sigma BF. But my initial impressions are basically that this is a huge improvement hardware-wise over previous Sony cameras. It's quite a technical achievement. I do think the upgrade from the A1 to the A1 Mark II is worth it just because of the hardware and the back screen, honestly. If you have the money and you're using this every day for work, But I will say that for me, it might not be compelling enough to enter the Sony system completely. There's way more magic in this RX1R Mark III than there is in this A1 II, in my opinion. And there's still some things about the Sony system that just don't grab me. There's still a little bit of ick there. We'll see, but I will say this is a worthy upgrade, probably worth the money that Sony's charging for it. It still is a very impressive camera, even though it was just a light refresh of a camera that came out several years ago. So, what are your thoughts? Have you tried the A1 II? Do you agree that there's lots of great improvements, but maybe the image quality and color science still needs to be improved to make Sony top of the pops of all the digital camera brands? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.